Good evening, everybody. This is the Man Talk Podcast 43, and we've got guests tonight, mutual friend David and I. This is Tyler, and Tyler, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Stover. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Me too. And we haven't done a lot of podcasts recently, but Julie and I are working on some other stuff in the meantime, and we'll probably start posting some more of our planning podcasts, and some of that is going to be uploaded soon at some point. Um, but today we were really going to get started with some of the stuff that Tyler and I were talking about when we met up in person for the first time.
Yes.
So one of the things we were talking about was internet privacy, and that's something I don't really know very much about. But Tyler needed to get back to his home, and he stopped by where I live, and we got to be talking. I'm going, man, we got to continue this. So we turned it into a podcast for him. So yeah, this is what it's going to be. Tyler, where do you want to take us as far as internet privacy goes?
Well, I guess I'll start by saying I'm not an expert at all. I'm just a guy who's lived on the internet pretty consistently since he was about 10 years old. I'm 33 now. I'm giving my age out. Uh, and it's something that I've kind of, having been out on the internet for so long, you kind of just get to observe the changes over time, back from using MSN and AIM and MSN Messenger and AIM and ICQ and all those things, all the way, now we're using Discord and we're doing, video streaming, and it's super easy and not a big deal. But with all those different things out on the internet that you participate in, you're giving away little bits of information. And over the years, it's definitely become more and more of a prevalent thing, like privacy. You see, manufacturers or software developers rather, although Apple kind of verges that line a little bit, um, uh, putting more of those tools in the consumer's hands so that they're able to, protect themselves, I guess, from, I use air quotes because, you do have certain levels of protections you can take on your own, but there definitely are, things that are a little out of your control. Um, but we see those tools coming in and being made available to consumers uh, fairly consistently over the past like 2 years. I believe it's been like a big push. You see Android specifically like in the phone market, um, less so on the operating system level. I think Apple's done a much better job at that than Microsoft has personally. Um, but definitely from your phone, uh, with the 2013 to like 2015, there was a huge explosion of like apps that come out and they can do everything. And, we're still seeing, brand new technologies, filters, all those kind of things. The ability for AI to, manipulate still images and bring them alive. And AI is a whole separate issue, or topic, depending on how you look at it. But there's, there's a lot more tools that are available to the consumer now because apps, you install an app on your phone and it's like, oh yeah, I have access to my contacts and my messages and whatever, my GPS and yada yada yada. And for a while no one really, like, oh yeah, of course I want you to do this, but then you realize what those permissions actually expose to the apps. And then not necessarily, I'm not trying to say every app's malicious and everyone's trying to steal your data, although it's debatable. But certain apps use other services, because the developer can't do everything on their own, so they use other applications or other software libraries and things to help support their app and make it more usable. um, Google has their own tools they give out to developers to help track and do analytics and things like that. Well, all that data that's used in those analytics that Google collects for you also goes to Google servers. It's hosted there and then given to the developers so they can do their analytics and kind of figure out what their market is and who their main consumers of their apps and how they potentially want to monetize it or spend their ad revenue money, things like that. um, so it's definitely become more of a consideration for just the average person these days, although I think saying it's a consideration of the average person is probably a stretch even at this point. Because you have apps like TikTok that are notorious for stealing your data, or Facebook, that which I'm sure we will discuss a lot about, that try and not only figure out who you are, your age, um, some of your what's the word I'm trying to think of right now, some of your data points, for lack of a better word,
Attributes.
um, attributes, yeah, your personal attributes. Thank you. But also, there's like a profile that you can fit. And so they try and, not only just analyze where you go, what you look at, the content you're consuming, but also kind of who you are as a person. And I think that is in and of itself a little scary, that, a company can build almost like a psychological profile of you based on various different things. The example that I love, again, going back to Facebook, is, and not love, but just find interesting, is Facebook was doing tests on their users. Basically, there's a concept like A/B testing. If you're not familiar with it, if any of your viewers aren't familiar with it, essentially you take a group of people and you give part of them, this A thing, whatever it is, whether it's a different view of a website or different content, and then you also have the B version of that content or website or page or image or whatever, and you present that to another group, and you kind of just give different perspectives on things and see which one gets more traction, all that stuff. There's a, I think, fairly well documented instance where Facebook was presenting, more positive posts to one set of people and more negative posts to another set of people, and they were using, the results of presenting those different, you know, how, I don't know how they came to determine what was positive, what was negative. That I can't speak to, but their understanding of positive posts they presented to one set of people, and their understanding of negative posts they presented to another set of people, and they watched how those presenting more of that information to a user impacted their user retention, or the post they made, or whatever metrics. I'm not a part of Facebook, so I don't know, but whatever metrics they were trying to gather. And it's definitely a little frightening, that these companies are able to gather so much from you. Um, when we put ourselves out there, again, consistently going to use Facebook as an example, because I think they're the largest, most, being Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, they have a large hold on a lot of the internet right now. Uh, and so when, you go on their sites, you expose a lot of data, and you don't pay for Facebook, you don't pay for Instagram, you don't pay WhatsApp. Um, so you have to ask yourself, how are they getting their money? How are they such a large entity when they offer all these services for free? And the short answer is ad revenue, right? They're able to serve ads to people and collect the money from whoever that company is, individual, whatever, and turn that into more ways to better serve people ad revenue. So when they're serving you it, they want to make sure that they're giving the right people, they're presenting the ads that these companies, individuals paid for, and giving them to the target audience that will best benefit, or absorb the information, or in most cases likely to click on the ad. And in that way you become the product. And that to me is, I don't want to be a product, Stoffer. I really don't.
I think most of us don't. I mean, we kind of just wanted to be on there for friends and, for just what Facebook was, let's say, like in 2007 or 2008. Like
Right.
that, when we got on at that time, I'm going, oh, this is kind of fun. But that was also about the time when smartphones were just coming up, but they weren't popular yet.
Yep.
But then 5 years later, Facebook changed. And I remember it because the photo count just skyrocketed. I mean, legit exponential increase. So not skyrocket in terms of like how the media would say, but legit exponential increase of photos. And I remember trying to keep up with everyone's life, and I'm just like, this ain't happening. Wow, Facebook changed a lot.
Yeah, it definitely did. I remember, I wasn't part of the first group or anything, but I remember, getting I think it was an invite from somebody. It was when they took it out of the college group, because I think I was just getting into college around 2008. Um, and they brought it into a more wider group of people. But I think at the time it was still invite only. It was long time ago. I don't
2008,
really
you could
remember.
do it yourself,
You could do
and
it yourself. Okay, then
yeah,
maybe I just registered myself. Um, but yeah, it definitely was. It felt really cool. It was definitely different than MySpace, because that was the big thing before Facebook. Um, and it was cleaner. It felt nicer. MySpace kind of, it felt like it gave everybody like a similar footing when you were going to go look at everybody's profile and kind of check out your friends. You didn't have a lot of, for those who maybe never were on MySpace, MySpace had a lot of like GIF things that were on there, a lot of sparkles. You had to rank your friends, yeah, or you could, you put like your top 5 friends in order, on your profile, and it just uh, it just didn't it just was much cooler. And I think I don't know because I wasn't super big into them at the time, but I don't remember MySpace being as like share friendly as Facebook was. And for a while I was really into Facebook. I thought it was great. I gave them all my information. I was like, oh yeah, this is so cool, I love it. And then I got employed by a tech company, and I had there was like an after work thing, and I got to sit down with a guy from a larger tech company you may or may not have heard of, but I'll refrain from saying specifics. And we had a very interesting discussion over a drink about like the future of data harvesting, about users, what they're giving, at the time that they, go to websites. I was still beginning, like I said, I've been 33, been on computers since I was pretty much like 10 or 11. I had a great mentor growing up who kind of like helped me overcome a lot of the hurdles that people encounter. But I was still just beginning my software development career, I guess. Uh, and it it definitely kind of opened my eyes to like, oh, uh, right, when you go to a website, like just even sending the request to the server to say like, hey, I want your web page. The server's like, oh yeah, cool, cool, yeah, you're this IP address, you're this user agent, which is, um, like the browser, the operating system, basically kind of just the frameworks of your computer, so that the web server can serve you the content that's best fit for your machine. Um, and then they give you the web page, and you look at it, and it renders on your browser, and you're like, oh, this is really cool, and you make another request, and so on and so forth. um, you know Not only that, but then the time it takes you between, where you're gonna, your first loading to the page to the time it takes you to actually see the page. That's a really important metric for web development. Um, and they have like these, if you have a browser that you like, they pretty much all have it where you can actually, go to the inspector or the dev tools or whatever. And when you load a web page, if anybody wants to try it at home, you're welcome to. You pull it up, and then there's like a network, usually tab. I think on almost everyone it's called network. And you click on that, you click record, or in some cases just does it automatically. You can actually watch, you send the request to the server, how long it took, and then, you know, how long it took for those resources, whether they're images or text or whatever, to be sent over to you, or assets from other websites, because some websites get content from other websites when you load it. So when you load a web page, if anyone's not aware, sometimes you're not only just talking to that one web server, but other web servers out there. Um, jQuery is a big example of that, where a lot of websites don't host their own jQuery files. They will if they want to have the page load fast, and they have a content distribution network and all that stuff, yada, 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 a lot of tech words, for maybe those who aren't super familiar with them. But when you go to a website, you're not only just giving the website information, but you're also giving, potentially Google, with Google Analytics or whatever they're calling it these days, um, any other analytic tool that a developer might use, because there are other options outside of Google, although Google's probably the most prominent one, considering I think like somewhere around 70 to 80%, which I may be underestimating, of their revenue, or Alphabet. I don't know how they allocate their earnings anymore. um, that's how they make a lot of their money, is from ad revenue. So that tool is a core part of their business model, being able to collect data from the user and then, provide accurate results back to whoever needs them to serve somebody ads. Um, so when you go on a website, not only are you giving them your data, but you're also potentially giving other web services out there your data as well. And this guy just kind of like opened my eyes to that understanding, where I had, kind of a limited understanding, I think, of all that at the time. And he just kind of brought to my attention the amount of information that was being gathered. He was, I think, the first person that ever brought it to my mind. He's like, how do you think Facebook makes their money? How do you think Google makes their money? Like, you go there and you use it all the time. There's hardware behind that. There's a physical location where that stuff sits. Servers are hot. They run really hot, and they generate a lot of heat with electricity flowing through the transistors, flipping those bits on and off, going through memory, going through the drives, however those are structured, hard drives, disk drives, tape drives, whatever. Most people don't use tape drives anymore. Um, but, that all generates heat, and that heat has to be dissipated in those physical locations. Otherwise, it accumulates and starts wearing down or eventually causes the failure of those electronics. And that all costs money. That's all expensive. Like, I want to run my own server in my house, but I'm going to run one ventilation fan. I'm actually kind of concerned how well that'll actually work. Um, and then obviously the electricity it takes just to power it all. Um, that'll cost money, and you're just using it for free. You just go on, you pay for your internet connection. And by the way, your ISP has access to everything you're doing. Um, and you don't pay for any of it. So how do they recoup their costs? At the end of the day, their business, they're trying to make money. They have a business model they're trying to follow. Um, and he was the first person to kind of open my eyes to the idea that we are the product. Our engagement is what they're after. And that's going back to what I was saying before about like the load time of a page. For this tech company I worked for, we were really focusing on getting our load times down to, less than like 3/4 of a second, because we found that engagement drops substantially, you know, when you're at like a second and a half of load time or 3 seconds or 5 seconds. They have their like substantial, stepwise drops. The longer it takes your page to load, the less retention you have. Um, and he brought that to my attention. I was learning about it working for the company as well, but like I never really kind of like connected those two bits in my mind until that time, and kind of got me thinking. And it's the internet's a scary place. You put a lot of stuff out there. um, right now we're video chatting on Discord, so our data is being streamed through the Discord servers. To be honest, I don't even know where they are. um, More than likely, they're probably hosted somewhere on like Amazon Web Services, for example, or because cloud computing is a pretty big thing now, or Google Cloud Services, excuse me, or Azure, um, whatever Microsoft's one is called. Uh, so there's just so much data now more than ever that is just presented out to the ether, or the internet, I guess, if we're specifically talking about that. And I feel like a lot of people take for granted how easy and free all that stuff is to gather. And I heard a little anecdote one time, and I don't know how true it is, but I like repeating it because it sounds neat. um, Regurgitating bad information, it's also something that's a problem too. uh, but that Google can pretty much pin down who you are within like 10 searches, even if you use a brand new computer. Connecting from a place that you don't really know, just by how long it takes you to do stuff. The time between you send the request to the server to get Google's page and it's rendered on your screen, and then how long it takes you to type in whatever you want to search for on top of what you're searching for. Those kind of things. And within like 10 20 searches, they can have a good idea of who you are. Maybe not, you are, or I am Tyler, but like I am a 18 to 33-year-old male who lives in this, who probably has preferences for this, who's probably, this political orientation, so on and so forth. They can really narrow the gap as to who you are. Because there's just, statistical trends on, people who go to Reddit. Now it's great. Let's pull this one out. People who go to Reddit for their very first site. People who go to Google to search for Amazon rather than someone who will go into their address bar and type in Amazon.com. Certain people go to, and I've definitely been guilty of this as well, Google search stuff that I just know the address for, but I'm so lazy I just type it into Google and I click the link. I'm just like,
Same.
I don't know. That's what I do. It's how I've done it. I'm just lazy. But those like trends and those habits that you form behind your use of the internet really do dictate, certain generations, right? So, Stover and I are fairly close in age. We're going to have similar traits and habits that were formed due to the years that we started using the internet versus someone who, maybe is in the 12 to, 18 range. They're going to have different ways they use the internet. They're going to have different tools they use. They're going to have different things from their social groups that are big. I know when I was like 18, StumbleUpon was really huge. And that was, I think StumbleUpon got amazingly large right before Reddit started to like take off. But that had its own issues because it just stumbled upon if you don't remember what it was or can't even. Well, I think it's still a thing you can do, but essentially click a button and it brings you to a random website on the internet, which has its own negatives when people post like viruses and stuff on there, and you click on it and it takes you to a thing and it gives you a virus because
Remind me
you're
not to
aware of
go
that,
there.
right? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they do a better job now of like, curating the content. Um, but it's definitely amazing how like the little things kind of add up to build a profile of a human. Whether you're male or female, I think that's a fairly easy thing they can just right off the bat, regardless of if you have an account, if you're using a brand new computer. I love, um, I don't, well, I guess I do. Yeah, I love it. There's this Radiolab podcast. Shout out to Radiolab. If you've not listened to it, it's a great podcast, scientific podcast where they go in and just like ask questions about things in life. Um, I can't recall the specifics, but there's a podcast on creating a cryptocurrency, and this guy wanted Zcash. I think it was Zcash. Don't hold me to it, but I think it was Zcash. He wanted to create the most like secure cryptocurrency ever. I don't understand a ton about cryptocurrencies, but what I do understand is there's like a starting value, like a key. And if somebody has that, they can actually manipulate that currency how they want if, they're malicious enough, to probably an extent. But to take that risk out of the currency, this guy had uh, tried to think of like literally everything. So, what, for example, when they were building it, he had everybody buy a brand new laptop. So there were like 7 people involved, I think 7 or 8, and everybody got like a piece of the puzzle, right? And so every piece needed to, have computing power behind it to like help generate part of the whole that would become this currency. And he made or asked or paid for everybody to go out and get a computer and then run their piece. Um, and during the process, there was a person from Radiolab there who was following it and recording everything that was going on. Um, and when during the process, they were all in like a voice chat or something, and they were all chatting along, waiting for the process to finish. It takes time to do all those computations, and all of a sudden, the person who was documenting the whole process from Radiolab's phone, who was in a different room because I think they made everybody put their phones somewhere else or something, and they air gapped all the computers so they weren't connected to the internet, so there was no risk of anybody coming in and hacking it. They really went to the extreme with everything, and all of a sudden the phone started replaying the feed from one of the computers that wasn't part of the computation, but was, there participating because maybe it was the other guy's computer or whatever, and it was piping out the audio from the other computer. And those two things aren't connected, right? There's no, at least in what they were doing, she didn't connect her phone to the thing. She wasn't participating in it. Some hacker had gotten in because they were trying to do whatever hackers do, and ended up like screwing up their hack, and started outputting the audio from whatever they were trying to listen to onto the phone. Don't ask me how it happened. I couldn't tell you. I'm not that skilled. But it is many people, that tried to secure this process to make sure it was as secure as possible. There's still other people out there that were trying to, use that, trying to interfere with that process in one way or another. And that was for, a cryptocurrency that effectively at the time was worth nothing, right? I mean, it didn't even exist yet, but they were already trying to screw with it. Now imagine if you had, a cache of everybody's social security numbers and profiles and, all that personal data. How much more is that worth? How much, how how motivated would be a malicious entity be to come in and get that data? And that's something, like Facebook sits and has an unbelievable amount of information on people. Instagram has an unbelievable amount. TikTok, anybody who, any large social media platform has a ton of information on people, and there are a lot of bad actors out there, and it's it's not necessarily always my concern that Facebook, Twitter, um, YouTube, whatever, is going to, try and be malicious with the data, but it's also the part that they're collecting all this about you. They're analyzing you, Google as well. Everybody has a free Gmail account, right? Well, Google can read your Gmail. Everyone has a Google Drive. Put all your files on a server somewhere. Who knows where it is? Um, and that's just sitting there on a server somewhere, and it exists and it can be stolen. You know, and that's just something that is frightening. And we've seen several hacks of prominent, government entities. There was the one hack where all the source code for a lot of government applications, because some intern, quote unquote, some intern set up the password as like the default password or something, um, and somebody just hacked it. Didn't have to put in much effort because it was the default password. And there you go. There's all the source code. There was the IRS's, was it the IRS hack? I'm not sure about that one actually, but there was the Equifax, one of the
Yeah,
credit
Equifax.
agencies.
You're talking about
Equifax.
the credit agency where they like try and figure out who you are
Yeah,
financially trustworthy wise.
yeah, and they have all the information. You get reported every single time you go for a job or do anything. They report you and the information that you put on your job app to those companies, so they know what you're doing, where you live, yada yada yada. Um, and all that information is gone. Who knows? Like on the dark web. It's just the non-indexed portion of the internet, essentially what Google doesn't have. Um, but I have definitely covered some of like the negatives, but there are also some, like, there's like Apple, who's taken a pretty big stand, and I'm actually pretty impressed with their ability to they're starting to randomize the serial numbers on the Mac, on their MacBooks, so that when people go and, or some company tries to pull that information from your device, that is randomized, will be randomized soon. They obscure your email address. They've given you additional controls for, just as an example, they've given you additional controls for, privacy settings, and definitely have stepped it up. Google, I think, is getting caught up, but isn't quite as caught up as Apple is on that point. But they're definitely competitive. I mean, I don't I don't really care either way. Google, Apple, they're great devices. But then they definitely have more protections these days than they did in the past, as well as their services like DuckDuckGo that are able to allow you to search the internet a little more privately. Mozilla has made some changes recently to help folks when they're going around on the internet. They're able to block um, block what cookies or trackers on the internet are following you around. And
Sure.
it's there's definitely companies out there that are trying to make it easier and trying to make security a top priority, but it definitely conflicts. There's the old saying that what do you want? Do you want privacy or do you want convenience? There's definitely like a give and take there, because you can't have both in the same, in, with anything really. I mean, the more secure you want to be, the longer your passwords have to be. That's a larger inconvenience when you're typing it out. Um, there's alternatively for like password manager. Stover, do you use a password manager?
I used to do LastPass for a while. Julian's been giving me a fair amount of information about like different chips you can get, so that way every time you put in your password, you need to like put in a chip into your computer, and then that's like the other half of the password. So that's kind of
Yeah.
cool. Um, I've thought about it. The 2 point verification for me is like that. That sold me because I think that's a great hybrid, because if they don't have my phone, they can't get in. And it's like awesome, cool. I like the 2 point verification because that stops them because they don't have the other half, and I don't need to buy this other chip thing. So I think as long as we're going more towards that direction, I'm happy with that middle ground. Now, if I had something that was a little more sensitive for information, and maybe this will be more uh, significant as I get older, maybe there'll be more like financial codes or something I need to keep under wraps. Maybe I'll start going more towards that information, and I'll post that later because I can't remember the name right now. But Julie and I talked about it in one of our pre-plannings, and yeah,
Mhm.
he's real into that stuff, which is funny because you're bringing up some of the things that he was.
Yeah, I hate to burst your bubble on that one, but I just recently actually read an article about somebody who filed a change of line or something on the behalf of someone else to then intercept their text messages without them even knowing. So they were able to get past the two-factor authentication where they sent that person the code via text message. In case anybody doesn't know, by the way, text messages are not encrypted at all, ever. So all that stuff goes through like freely, and anybody could really read it who wanted to. Um, although it is better. Don't get me wrong, it's better than having nothing. Like there's always like the baseline, and then there's a few steps. And two-factor just in and of itself is a, a great thing to have, because unless you're being specifically targeted, usually for whatever reason, and most people aren't, right? Most people aren't like most hackers don't like, I'm going to get you, Tyler. I'm going to get you, Stover. They're like, I'm looking for an easy target. I'm fishing, and whatever the dumbest one is out there to grab the hook, I'm going to reel it in, right? They don't want to put, just like companies, they don't want to put a ton of effort. They want to invest the least amount of time and money into something to get the highest possible yield. That is a very consistent thing across all of human nature. When you look at just about everything, you want to put in the least amount of time to get the most amount of reward. And so, unless you really piss somebody off, um, I think you're probably fine with two-factor authentication. So I'm not trying to fear monger here, but there definitely is, it's something that needs to be brought up and talked about. Um,
Sure, maybe the
you
way the
know,
2 factor authorizing thing, maybe they'll have another way to be able to encrypt it as you go into the 2020s, and that'll probably be like the next level
well,
improvement, because it'll be in the best interest of Google and Apple because they're in competition with one another. I would expect they both want to play the game of I have the convenience and the security, you can trust me, and then there'll
mhm.
be the pull back and forth, which actually is really good because that forces them to get better. If it was just Google, let's say, and we kicked Apple off the face of the earth, that would kind of suck actually, because then you wouldn't have that challenge as much. So, and even though I'm,
Yeah,
I'm definitely more of an Android kind of person, um, for what it's worth, it's good that Apple does exist, even though I don't necessarily like them. I know what they do good for. Like their video cameras are
yeah,
unbelievable. I saw them a few days ago. Yeah, and like you're using a
yeah.
phone, right? So
Yeah,
it's
I
just
have an iPhone 10. something, just a regular one. I have the Pro model with all the three cameras in the back, but it's not the big one. It's the smaller one because my hands are tiny. I don't need anything that large.
Yeah,
Um,
it's cool because
but
like some of the stuff that I'm using for the podcast, like I'm using a Lumix camera, and
mhm.
it's kind of funny that maybe in 5 years this kind of setup would be insignificant. I could have just used my phone and put that on a tripod and called that a day. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's if you have a more modern thing, something that was made in the last like 2 3 years, definitely the camera quality has gone way up specifically. Uh, but there is there is that like what do I want to say? There, as technology improves and as software is better, hardware is better, um, it makes it easier for people to hack your stuff, whether it's through like brute force or through like a targeted attack or something. The better technology gets, the better those tools are, not only to help protect yourself, but to you know that people can utilize to cause mischief and mayhem. uh, I think one other topic that I really wanted to talk more about tonight as well, not to get off privacy and all that stuff, but still along the technology lines, is like what uh, how I guess user engagement almost really drives content that is seen by people out in the world.
yeah, if we're gonna branch us
So
off from into the social media kind of aspect, which is kind of part of the internet privacy.
it
Um,
is,
so this is just
but
really more of a subcategory of it.
yeah, yeah, but it definitely, I'd say it's almost its own category, because like going a little bit kind of a lead in, going back to, talking about, the load times for pages and things like that, that's all kind of, I feel like maybe I have this wrong, but I feel like that's where a lot of this, user engagement stuff starts. How can we get someone to go to our site longer? How can we get someone to click through and go to certain links and all this stuff? And I know there's search engine optimization, how well your stuff is organized on your site to how you appear on Google and things like that. And you want to appear top on Google so that people click on you first, because the second page of Google is like no man's land as far as most people are concerned. If you don't find it in the first like 5 links, you're probably not gonna, no one's gonna find it. I mean, let's be honest, no one really, the average person does not really go past the first few links in Google. I would say on average that's a fair statement. I don't. I use the internet all the time, um, but sometimes there's value in digging through there. But I do find the quality goes down quite quickly, and I opt personally, um, not to get too off, but I opt to use a lot of the Google search engine filters and codes and like limiting things to specific sites so that it only pulls content from those sites, so I can really narrow down my searches rather than just typing in what color is a dog or something like that. I also don't use like is and a and from and those words. I just generally type in like the keywords that I'm looking for in Google. So I have my own little hacks to try and make things go faster. But a lot of this, always going back to what I was saying before, a lot of this spawned from how do we get people to interact with our site more? And because you are the product, including that in here, um, really your engagement in the content on the website is how they make their money. So getting you to click on the link, getting you to click on the ad, making the ad look more appealing to the person, putting the content up that is more engaging. And Stover, I'll ask you, what's more engaging? Um, a inflammatory post about something someone did that goes against your belief system, or a post about a chair?
They're always going to go
You
with the
know,
instigating one, man. And that's actually how we
instigating,
kind of
right?
got here. It's like
Yeah,
a negative feedback loop towards get the most clicks, the most likes, the most angry faces. Because they added the emoji stuff. That was something that was new. They started putting in. It's not just a like anymore. Now you can put in multiple emotions. So then it's okay. We can get even more and more and more clicks. So that even the stuff that they would normally just say, yeah, no, I really dig that. It's just a chair, but it's a good chair. But then the other stuff's like, oh, I must pay attention to this building on fire, and then you find out that it was like a out of context story, or the building was on fire, but only this little section of the building, or whatever it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, it's always about trying to get your attention with something negative.
Yeah, or something positive. There's feel good stories out there that hit home. Or animals get a lot of traction as well. Those definitely bring more. And I don't believe. Well, I'd like to believe that those companies try to keep just let what goes to the surface go to the surface. But I know from having read and seen things go down, like on specifically a great example is Twitch, or actually an example that I love that my girlfriend brought up is there is a content creator on Instagram that does uh, I forget what the term is off the top of my head. People pose nude, and he takes photos of them, and it's boudoir. Yes, I think that's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
And so, um, just as an example, might not be something you're into, and that's fine. But he actually, because his content is more risque, uh, he has actually been quote unquote shadow banned from Instagram, which means when you go to search for him and search for content, um, you actually have to type in his full and complete name for any of his stuff to show up, because the admins on, or the powers that be on Instagram, decided that this person content isn't what they want presenting on their site. And so I'm not judging his content at all, but it's more of like to make the point that there is human interaction and human judgment that does go in to find what people want to see or not see, and what's going to keep people on the site longer, and get them at the end of the day more clicks, more likes, more clicks on ads, ideally. Um, I've also seen it with Twitch as well, the game streaming site, where Twitch definitely picks and chooses who gets promoted, who gets set down lower. I'm sure the same thing happens on YouTube, and the YouTube suggestion algorithm is a whole nother monster in and of itself. Mainly because YouTube, I feel like the perception is YouTube is basically unmoderated, except by robots, uh, and robots don't always make the best decisions. AI is still in its infancy as far as AI is concerned, and that's something I personally want to know more about and really dig into that at some point in my career or personally. But the YouTube suggestion algorithm is like, hey, enjoy these, um, My Little Pony videos, or this kids show, or this show about woodworking, and then it'll bring you into like, maybe it's an extreme example and it's more for hyperbole, but the Nazis did nothing wrong, stuff like that. And it's just like completely out of context, completely irrelevant to what you were watching, and not always appropriate. And then, we've seen more recently that, or at least I have seen in the things that I look at on the internet, um, let's say we like it's everybody. Uh, there's all these weird ads, not weird, but like sexually suggestive ads that come up for kids on their like games. You download a game on your phone and you're playing it, and then all of a sudden this ad pops up, and it's like something completely inappropriate that isn't even related or remotely in the same like hemisphere with the content that you're trying to observe. A lot of that stuff is just AI is making bad decisions. um, Other stuff is their target is wrong for that person, they're serving the wrong ad. There's a bunch of reasons why that might be happening, but at the end of the day, the reason it's being done is to try and get the person to click on it, to try and get the person to you know spend more time with that thing, or in essence earn whatever company is serving you that ad more money. And it tends to be going to the point that we wanted to get here. So we got all this lead in, which is it tends to prop up a lot of the negative stuff, a lot of the really anger, enraging, stuff, or in certain cases like the radicalization, where it brings in all these conspiracy theory stuff, all this really crazy thing that has every conspiracy theory has a hint of truth in it. You know, it definitely didn't come from nowhere, but like a lot of that is just absolutely insane. I don't have a great example to pull out there, but one of the ones that is always thrown out is the 9/11 conspiracies, all of them, whatever one you want to pick from. Um, those are engaging. A lot of people, majority of people live through that. I think on the planet right now, maybe. I don't know. I'm not good at that kind of math,
Well,
but you
and
know,
all I know is that at least for the average person, people with 9/11 are like, holy crap. We just got ourselves. We had what, 4 planes? 3 of them actually hit the target. One of them missed.
I believe that's correct. Yeah, you had the two for the towers, the Pentagon, and then the one that went down in like Chicago or near somewhere in the western part of the United
Yeah, and then
eastern
of
part
course
of the
that
United
one was
States.
going for the White House, supposedly.
Yes, supposedly, probably it makes sense considering all the other targets that were go. But as to why and the motivations and who did it and all that stuff, it's hard to say unless you're one of those people on those planes. But
For
no one
sure,
survived.
and a
So
lot happened then. I mean, that's people think like, oh, it was all meant to be, and I'm going, dude, do you have any idea how much changed after that? Like, airports will never be the same ever again.
mm, yeah, yeah, it
So,
was super easy to fly before. But even just me bringing it up right now, right? Like it engaged you. You were like, you have emotions about it. It draws a reaction from you. It draws a reaction from just about anybody who lived through it. Everybody can remember the day. Not everybody. Sorry, the whole world doesn't revolve around America.
man, Dave and I
But
were in fourth grade at that time, man, and it was just like it hit everybody hard because that was a big point in
yeah,
time when we thought the
huge
world
change.
was safe, and then we're like, oh, it's not. World's not safe.
I mean, it never really was. It really hasn't been throughout history, so
No,
that's
but
fine.
it's just
Um,
we grew up in the '90s. I mean, there was this real
yeah,
like mantra that everything is just
we're all
pretty much
fine.
Andy. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, that was an interesting time.
yeah, and so stuff like that really draws engagement from people, whether it's good or bad emotions, and that's what the end of the day, that's what brings these tech companies money. I wouldn't say I am a fan of Google. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of Apple. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of Amazon or Facebook. I use their services, except for Facebook. Really, I actively stay away from Facebook. I'll say that. Um, Google, Amazon, and Apple, I definitely engage with way more and more frequently involved in those things. Um, I truly despise Facebook. Probably couldn't tell that throughout the examples I've given today, but I just don't like them as a company. I don't think they provide value to the world. I think they help people connect and they help groups communicate, but one of the downsides of algorithms and AI and computer learning, yada yada, is that Facebook is always like, oh yeah, we'll help you find people or your interests and blah blah blah. We'll suggest things you like and yada yada yada. But one of the other things it does is it helps. I think this is fairly well documented, but I apologize if I'm not always on top of everything that I say. Um, a grain of salt.
Yeah,
Um, but one of the other things is not only does it help people who are trying to knit sweaters together, or read books, or do woodworking, but it also helps groups who extremist groups all around the world connect together because they share similar interests of their hatred of one thing or another. Doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter what it's for. Not everything isn't America against the world, but it can be Facebook operates in every country in the world, um, and so there's conflict between just about every group in the world, probably. Everybody's got one thing against somebody else, and so it helps bring those people with like minds together to hate against another group, and I don't, I like to think the original developers of those algorithms were like, you want to bring hateful groups together, right? But it's just a side effect of not looking as forward as we possibly could have, and who knows if that was even a feasible thing to do. And thinking of all the outcomes of every single thing, we're not Doctor Strange, right? We don't have the time stone, and we can't look in the future, and yada yada, Marvel reference. Um, but you know there's definitely like some introspectiveness that needs to be done. You know, when you're really creating these like these tools and programs and software that are so impactful to
Yeah,
the
let's
world.
we can dig in more on Facebook too, because
I'm
we
fine with
said
that.
earlier that it was fun. It used to be fun, and
It used to
then
be. Yeah.
it got overwhelming for me. And like this is my
Yeah.
timeline. So it started with fun.
Yeah.
It connected with a lot of people, and then it started to get a little overwhelming. The photos thing was definitely a big problem, and then the suggestions started to be like, okay, I feel like I'm getting targeted. That's kind of strange. And then you still want to hang out because you feel like you're doing a service to keeping up with people you care about. But then your friend group is still climbing, 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 climbing. And then eventually I'm unfollowing people. I have to unfollow people. My feed is just getting too much. And then
Yep.
at one point, I think it was sometime around 2016, which makes sense. That's about the time when things really started to get out of hand with social media. I said that's enough. No thanks. I can spend my time otherwise. If for everyone else, you can get a hold of me on the call or text or on Discord or even on a podcast like this, but
Hmm.
Facebook, that's taking a lesser extent for me now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my transition happened a little earlier than that. You know, a lot of my, you know, schoolmates and people I interacted with on daily used Facebook Messenger, and so that was our big, you know, big way to communicate. Yeah, everyone was on there, everyone was always doing stuff, but you know, then you know, you start searching for stuff on Google, and all of a sudden, you know, you get 45 ads for, you know, some 3D printing stuff, and you're like, come on, Facebook, like I get it. I did my own research. Like I don't need you to try and sell me something. Like I bought the one. Like there's the meme that came up recently or comment or whatever. You know, I bought, this person was on Amazon. They're like, I bought a toilet seat because I needed one. I'm not a toilet seat connoisseur. I don't want 45 different toilet seats. You know, I just wanted the one to fix my problem. And, you know, that's definitely where technology goes wrong. But like, you know, you start seeing that targeted stuff and you're like, what are you really gathering from me? And everybody's talking about their phone listening to them, and maybe in certain isolated cases that was a reality, and maybe before the privacy controls and things came in that absolutely could have been a thing. But you know, people give away a lot of subconscious data from themselves when they search for stuff. You know, just
Yeah.
a great example is, you know, Facebook can know that you and I are friends, right? We're not actually friends on Facebook because we don't go on Facebook, just like we mentioned. So why would we need to be friends? We have other ways to communicate, and that's more prominent in our lives. Um, but you know, for example, Stover and I were friends, and Stover were searching for something that we had talked about. Maybe this is just purely a hypothetical situation, but Stover would have searched for something that we had talked about, you know, during this podcast. And what would then happen is then those ads, because Facebook would know that Stover and I are good friends, and that we have similar likes, and that we have similar qualities as a human, because it has profiled us based on all the information that we just hand over. Like, here, you know, go. um, and it would start suggesting those things to me. And now I would perceive that as Facebook is listening to me on my microphone and they're listening to our conversation. But in reality, you know, I just mentioned it to you, or we had a good discussion about it, and you went and looked it up. And Facebook's like, oh, Stover likes this. Tyler must like this too. So let's serve Tyler more ads just like that, because maybe he'll like it, because they have a lot of, you know, similar attributes. Um, you know, there's the perception of, you know, all these things happening and our privacy being invaded and yada yada yada, microchips and vaccines, right? But you carry around this like phone that you just constantly put information in all day, and it's a little index about your entire life. It doesn't need to listen to you. You know, you go on Chrome. A lot of people use Google Chrome, and this is a great example, because Google Chrome has in its address bar where you go to type in stuff, right? You type in cats, right? And then Google searches cats for you. The one thing that I don't know if a lot of people know, but I do, because I have worked with Google products throughout my pretty much entire existence. Because I've been, where's my keys here? No, my keys aren't here. On my key, I have the Google I/O, their I/O input output conference. I don't think they call it that, but they call it Google I/O. They're like developer conference where they release all their new stuff. I went to the 2010, 2011, and 2012. ones. So I have the one from 2010, when they gave out lanyards, I guess. But I've been around the Google sphere for quite a while, and it's been like my home for years. I only recently switched to Apple products April of 2020. So Apple products are relatively new for me. I've had various MacBook Pros in the past. Had an iPad and an iPod Touch as well back when those were big. But as you type stuff into the Google Chrome address bar, it actually records each character you put in order, and you can kind of see that happening if you have your settings configured right. I don't know if it's by default or not. I think it is. But as you type in the address bar, it actually records each character you put in and then provides suggestions as you provide more in. Every single time you press a key, that key press goes to Google. So it goes to Google servers, analyzes the whole string that you put in. So if you put CHA or CHO, because we'll go chocolate for this example, you CHO, and it's going to start pulling stuff in that CHO, and then you continue on typing out chocolate, and you're going to get closer and closer to that example. There's something, I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's as you converge towards what it thinks the answer is, you're going to get better and better results. But every single time you press that key, that information goes out. Even if you delete it, you misspell it, whatever, Google starts to learn, how you commonly misspell things, how you commonly type, and try and provide you with the best possible suggestion, and in that way, building a little profile on you. And that's, like, it's not even that, your search is going to Google, but it's like your process of getting to the search you want also goes to Google. Even just typing stuff that you might not be on Google, but you're using a Google product that has your Google account signed in on, and all that information is just sent right back to them to build a further profile on you. And it was eye-opening when I kind of like started putting those pieces together and really realizing, how much you're being monetized. And I don't like it, Stover. I really don't.
That's why we're having this podcast, man. I knew you
Yeah.
had some strong feelings on it, so here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a net negative personally. Um, that the intention is user engagement and not, I mean, where do you draw the line on like what to promote, what not to promote, and yada yada yada. But I use that phrase so much now.
Yeah, you can do yada 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 da 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 da. You can pick your poison.
Right, it's just a filler word, as I learned in speech class. There's just so many things that are being done to just get you to do more on those websites versus actually considering the effect they have on society, or how much hate they're fostering, or how much misinformation they're putting out. I don't know how your audience feels about vaccinations. I think they're a gift to the medical world. They definitely help relieve us of some terrible diseases that don't exist anymore because of vaccinations.
Yeah, no, this channel likes them.
That's good. But the fact that there's all this anti-vaccination stuff out there really, does society a disservice. Herd immunity is, argue as much as you want, you're not going to convince me it's not a real thing. But what it does is it really puts, it really harms, getting society to actually, take care of themselves and, take the steps that are necessary in order to make sure that, one person doesn't get sick, it doesn't kill off hundreds of thousands of people, as we have seen COVID do. That's still different, example, because we weren't able to prepare. However you believe COVID may or may not have came to be, because that is also potentially another conspiracy thing. The fact that there's all this misinformation, that's just what I'm going to call it, about vaccinations, really is a net negative on society, I believe. I think if people were more willing to get vaccinated. Not that we'd have more people vaccinated right now because we're still well behind on that. But the more people we will have vaccinated when we do have enough available come, quote unquote May, when actually that's the time when we do. Um, I definitely think we're going to see those impacts coming up here, being this brand new vaccination. I think we already see it with certain communities. Have had some outbreaks of, some of the previously stamped out diseases because they choose to not vaccinate. I know there's an
Dude,
area
Skid Row.
locally.
And we're talking about misinformation. Yeah, that's definitely happening. That's happening in
Yeah,
our own state of California. We're hearing talks about like, oh dear,
yeah,
that came back. Are you kidding me?
yep,
I mean, and that's just
yeah,
because you put a bunch of people in there that don't necessarily have a medical history that prevented a lot of this stuff from happening, like the all different shots you get as a kid. For what it's worth, I trusted my parents on that one. I'm really glad I did. It's a great idea. It's a great idea that the hospital systems came up with that. The,
yeah,
the amount of
absolutely.
disease that we're seeing come back from people not trusting it's kind of strange. Um, uh, the power of misinformation is it's crazy to me that the internet's spreading that kind of stuff, and you would think that maybe in the next decade, as we kind of curb the other way around, as people want to get a little more squared away with this, how we share information, maybe they'll
Hmm.
have suggested ads for some of those videos, like, hey, you should probably click on this one too. If you're watching this kind of video, you might want to watch the true information here if you're interested, because that's just
Yeah,
it's such an easy way to, oh, I was wrong, okay. And it's not even about like you're a bad person. It's just
no,
get with the program on what the true information is, and then let's move on.
yeah. I think it's a strong mark of a human to be able to sit, take in new information, understand where you went wrong, and learn from it. Going back to, I think this is something that we had on our notes, was the scientific theory, um, or the scientific method, not theory, the method, because it's not a theory, it's a process. You follow it. You find old information, you take the information that you think, you test it, you verify it, and then if it doesn't come out the way you think of it, you find a new way to structure your test and repeat the process over and over and over again until you or have a high level of confidence that this your theory actually matches practice in whatever way. And I think there is a great example of and again, I'm going to just pull anecdotes out of my butt, that I don't exactly have the specifics for, but I think it was a flat earther who realized a while ago, he spent his whole career trying to figure out and prove the earth was flat or something, found out he was wrong, and then just immediately changed his way and was like, I was wrong, like I totally was wrong, let me dedicate the rest of my life to proving how right this actually is and helping other people understand, that it was this I was wrong. And I think that's a great mark of a human, to be able to be like, I was incorrect. Now, going back to what you were saying, is like suggesting the true, or like the truth. There's certain things that I think, vaccinations being one of them. Obviously, you can talk about the COVID vaccine and its efficacy and its safeness and yada 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 because it's so new and untested and whatever. And I'll give that to you, absolutely. I think that fully hasn't passed the complete scientific method, but I think it's good enough, like to help us with our immediate issue. Good enough. Um, but there's definitely like, who decides what's true? Is that truth coming from a tech company that's just trying to get more clicks, or is the truth coming from like a really well known, well tested, scientifically method vetted concept? I think
Yeah,
that's a very important distinction when you're providing that information to somebody. I think there's a lot of things out there that could absolutely be up for debate, like i I think there is, some that validity to certain groups out there that have been, treated poorly over the years, especially by the medical community. And they have certain hesitancies to getting to receiving treatment from, the medical community, and I think that's valid. But I think those concerns also need to be addressed, and there's a lot of different a lot of different perspectives in the world, and there's a lot of different approaches, and just Western medicine and Eastern medicine and blah 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 blah. And I think there's science at the core of it, of all of it. There's like this scientific method of is this thing been proven to be effective?
Yeah, this is one of the things we were talking about that came out of
Yeah.
our conversation earlier when we had breakfast. Um, so when we got to meet up, that was one. That's actually the same. That was the same bridge that we did. Was you've got this problem of what's going on with the tech companies, how it's translated into misinformation, and then what people are forgetting that humans kind of already figured out well before the internet, well before people were vastly educated. And
Mm-hmm.
but nonetheless, our ancestors figured out this thing where you could actually test methods, and you don't attack people, you attack ideas, and see
Yeah.
what the truest thing is. And that was one of the coolest things that happened when we got to that point in the conversation that we were talking about earlier. And yeah, scientific method for me, I mean, that is the core to figuring out what idea am I going to be able to use that actually works for the method I want, or for what application that needs to take place. So, and the fact that I don't have, like, I don't know, it would be a weird world if the CDC would be like, hey, you got to tech companies, this is like a governmental thing that you need to like put in these suggestions
Yeah.
so people learn the truth. That's kind of gray area territory, but
That is for sure.
I think it should be addressed, because if you let people going on about this misinformation, and I think that's kind of dumb. You would think that people should have access to the good information, regardless of what they think about it. They should still have access. They shouldn't just be
Mm-hmm.
allowed to have their vacuum chamber and then just be like, well, I don't believe in that. It's a public safety thing. And I don't mean it like in a bad way. I mean it like, hey, for the betterment of your community, you're going to want to know about this. And you
Yeah.
could probably even reserve it for like baseline stuff, like gravity.
I think.
If someone says gravity's fake, I'm like, no, you shouldn't be allowed to. That's not true. You're spreading a bunch of lies. Here's a
Yeah,
suggested
there's a
video
circle.
about how gravity works.
Yeah. The Earth is not flat. I think we should all know that at this point. So easily, you can have like what two posts, two holes in those posts, and a light, like a camera, and you can easily disprove that the Earth is flat. Like,
Yeah, I think
it's not
laser.
even a
Yeah,
thing to consider. Um, there's that famous video on YouTube of those like people trying to disprove it, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna set these two things up, and if we put this one here, they're gonna be equal because the Earth is flat." Or maybe it was a documentary. I don't even know. Sometimes it's hard to tell these days. Um, but they tried to line it up, and they didn't see the light on the camera from the other side, and it's because the Earth has curvature, so the other post was just slightly lower. So of course they didn't line up. When they angled it down, oh yeah, they saw the light. Yeah, because it's curved. And I think going back to what you were saying about vaccines, no, I think someone definitely is more of a libertarian person. They can choose to not get vaccines. That's totally fine.
sure, that's great.
I
But I'm talking
support
about
your
like,
ability. Yeah, I support your ability not to get vaccinated. Do I think it's a good idea? Not at all. I think it's stupid. I think you're doing a disservice to your community by not doing it. Do I support your right to not get a vaccine? Totally. Like, that's your choice. I'm not going to impact you. But when you go around and start telling other people vaccines are bad and they hurt people and they're going to, negatively impact society, that's where I see you as a person negatively impacting the lives of other people around you. And that's where I have a problem. I think you want to do drugs in your own house, you want to do whatever you want, totally. You want to get your drugs, legally, but you want to, procure your drugs in a way that doesn't cause bloodshed and yada yada yada. You want to do them in your house, fine. I don't care. I could care less. Doesn't impact. But the moment, like my big thing is the moment your actions start impacting the health and quality of life of other people, that's where I start to have a real significant issue with your actions. And I think that is probably that's what I feel that all this anti-vaccination stuff is doing is it's not only causing harm to your immediate community, right? Because someone in let's say Florida for an example, probably if they don't vaccinate in their community, sans air travel and whatnot, not really going to impact me too much on a personal level. But as we are all so interconnected, not only digitally but physically, being able to take a flight and go just about anywhere in like 20 something hours, um, it really, like, your small local decisions start to really expand out to a more national, global stage. And the more this information gets put out there and the less these tech companies do to kind of like rein that in, for instance, like obviously false, very easily verifiable for through decades of scientific research, and hundreds, thousands of trials. Like they're like, oh, big government's not, publishing these articles. I, I what? No, one, all the scientific articles and journals are owned by like private companies. Like I don't know of any big government scientific journal company. They're all trying to make their own dime by charging you tons of money. And by the way, if you don't know this, people out there, if there is someone who has a like research you're trying to get from their published research, just email the author. Just email the author directly, and they'll send you their article. You don't have to pay the company money to get access to their research. Most of the time, they're happy to give it to you because that's what science is. It's a sharing of ideas and finding what's best and or what works the most efficiently. Because the best is a strange word, but finding what works most efficiently for the question. And if you go directly to the people and have a conversation, you'll be surprised what you can learn. They might, the people publishing the articles might not in every single case, but most cases I've heard of, they just give you their research freely. So I think there's definitely this history and this like centuries of research we've done to prove that these things work just fine. I believe they used to expose soldiers to diseases to help prevent them from getting it while out in the battlefield. Stuff like that was done. You're much more of a history buff than I am. Maybe you can comment on that. But it's just something that's been done. It's such an easy thing for me, I feel like, to go to as an example. Vaccinations, disease. Disease is bad. People suffering is bad. Generally, I think most humans with empathy feel that way. There
Yeah.
are people without empathy that don't share that same belief, obviously. But most people want to take care of other people, and most people do things because they believe it's the right decision to help their family. Um, and I think it's more about knowing the risks and just knowing the amount of time and energy that hundreds of thousands of people have put in to making these things as safe as possible and like is effective and least impactful to the human life. It should just be a no-brainer. And it's just
It's
sad
not
that that
though.
stuff is it's not anymore. It
Not
doesn't seem like
anymore.
it.
And a lot of
Not
that is
anymore.
because of the distrust. And some of that is because of that way social media wants you to click on stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
it just goes to those
A
particular
lot of that
vacuum
is.
chambers. And that blows because you now they are impacted by not having the full information. And the funny part is they get even more clicks if they get misinformation to multiple parties, and then they make them conflict, and that even gets more clicks. So we're right now on a roller coaster of to what extent are we going to keep being mad at the world every time we get online, let's say on Twitter or something,
Yeah.
or are we going to stand up and decide, we don't have to communicate this way. Let's see if we can go back to more of the grassroots level, and maybe we don't have to do it this way. Because I know it's like when I take a break from a lot of the social media stuff, I'm, as a human being, way more relaxed. And it's weird. I'm going, so is the world really going to hell in a handbasket? Or is it the perception of it every time I get on some of these forums or online or I read these posts or whatever? That's the
Yeah.
question I'm asking myself.
Yeah. There's the whole science of the dopamine of like seeing all that stuff and scrolling through things real fast and seeing new content and ooh, a cat. ooh, a flower. Oh no, this world leader is doing this thing and destroying these people. Or oh, hey, look, this person fell down on their skateboard. Oh, a baby. Like there's also I mean, that we don't need to get into, and I'm definitely not qualified to talk about the science. Um, 'Cause I'm a software guy, not a as much as we've talked about all these medical things, I'm not a medical person. Make that abundantly clear. Um, but there's also like the dopamine you get, or the rush of whatever of chemicals in your body that say yes, this is good, and that definitely has an impact on people's addictions to social media. And that's a whole nother thing. It's just like just not even really knowing why you're on there, just finding yourself going back. I'm sure and most everybody can probably relate this. You just find yourself on a website just scrolling through, whether it's Reddit or Facebook or Instagram or pick your poison, Twitter. Um, those are kind of the big hits. Um, you're just going through the motions almost. Um, I find myself trying to get away from Reddit personally. Like I want to absorb other content. I want to look at like, conflicting information that, necessarily isn't the extreme, but just is a different point of view. And, knowing your sources, knowing where you're getting your information from. There's a lot of people who just read the title of an article and they're like, this is horrible. I think Breitbart's a great example of that. The Reddit too. Any liberals, conservative media, blah blah blah. I think it doesn't really matter. I think it's just any sort of editorial thing, really. Um, but I'm more of a liberal person, but I have gone on Breitbart before and read their titles, and they're like aggressive and like inflammatory. But then you read the article and you're like, all right, well, I don't agree with it, but this is nowhere near what the title was. You go on like even NPR, man. Sometimes you go on NPR and you're like, all right. I will say I think NPR puts a little more effort in the articles than Breitbart does. Um, but like what's the other one? BuzzFeed. That's a great one. BuzzFeed. It's just trash, like literal trash, just published, like regurgitations of content on Reddit, like no effort whatsoever. I mean, there's that like clickbaitness of it all, just to try and get you to read it, but then you go and absorb the content, and you're like, this isn't even it, this isn't even remotely what the title was. This is like, there may have been something, there may not have been something. We don't really know, but we're just going to write an inflammatory article to get you to this point because we don't really care. We just wanted you on this page. We just wanted you to get off the homepage. We wanted you to click one layer deeper, and that was all we really wanted. Like,
Here's an
so we
ad.
can serve you another set of ads.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you scroll between 45 different ads to just get to the end of the content. You're like, this is just trash. I feel the same way with Apple News, man. I mean, it serves me content from Fox, from MSNBC, everywhere, but like I feel like I have to scroll through so many ads and I mean so much crap along the way. It just feels bad. I don't know. You read the article, you get all like, oh, what the hell is this? And then I'm human, I have to react to things. Um,
It's
and
good
then
to
I
know.
read through it. I'm like, you didn't even say shit about that. None of this really happened. Like conservative, liberal, whatever, trash. BuzzFeed is trash. It's all just to get you to click and engage further and to use you as a product. And it's oh, the Washington Post. That's ugh, I hate the Washington Post. I hate a lot of media. In fact, it's a lot of it's pretty bad,
Hooray!
regardless of where you go. Um,
Well, I mean, yellow
yeah,
journalism, we thought that was put to bed like 100 years ago, and then we're going, oh, I guess it's yellow journalism 2.0 now, huh?
yeah. Podcasts, phenomenal forms of media. I think podcasts have really spoken word. People having discussions. Say what you will about certain podcasts. Joe Rogan, I think, is one of the more controversial runs, like Howard Stern was. Although Howard Stern, I think, is still on the radio, but you don't hear about him much anymore. I think he's because on like Sirius XM, and no one pays Sirius money because they will hunt you down like the dog you are to get their membership fees. They've been calling me constantly since I got my new car. We subscribe. No, leave me alone. Um,
I
but
know that was an issue.
it's
Okay.
oh yeah, man. Sirius has been sending me emails, sending me physical mail, calling me on the phone, trying to get me subscribed to their stuff. They're the worst. My boss told me about this story. He subscribed to it because he was like, "Oh yeah, it's a great idea. It's satellite radio, cool." And then he couldn't he couldn't cancel it. He had to actually like cancel his card to get them to stop charging him. Yeah. Or like a
Whoa.
gym membership. I've heard the same thing with like gym memberships too, where they like don't let you cancel. Or there's the Friends episode where Ross tries and cancel his gym membership for all you Friends people out there. And they keep roping him back in, and then Chandler ends up going there. So it's, it's hilarious, but there's a little bit of truth in there. It's the extreme, but there's a little bit of truth in there. Um, you know, I find it hard to find. There are good sources out there, and there are good authors, and there are good writers, and there's great books. If you haven't read a book recently, I highly recommend it. I'm trying to read more books myself.
Yeah, same
Um,
here.
but like there is like as well. It might not always. One thing I've learned, having participated in a form of media, is there's the author, and then there's the editor. And with a lot of the stuff that gets posted online, I think there's a lot of, the author may have presented their story in one way, but then the editor got a hold of it, changed some words because they think it's going to be more engaging. They took some stuff out, they cut, a paragraph out, blah, blah, blah. You can also say the same about the Zack Snyder cut of the Justice League. He had his 4-hour masterpiece, and then Josh Whedon came in and cut it down to something that absolutely made no sense, and I hated the movie. Still need to watch the Zack Snyder cut, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. There's a lot of other influences that come in to produced content, whether it be a podcast. Although Stover, I believe you don't put much editing. You're not stripping stuff out. You're going for the raw bit.
A lot of raw
Um,
bits,
uh,
unless it was really bad and we just wanted to get like the 10 minutes that people would actually watch that actually had
yeah,
content. Because sometimes you'll
yeah,
find yourself, well, that was useful for like, let's say me and Julian going back and forth, but oh, there's 30 minutes of stuff that we probably don't want to have, like, that's too personal. Cut.
yeah.
But here's the thing that we were really trying to get at if we were going to tell it to somebody. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
yesterday we were talking about First Samuel, Second Samuel. We were talking about the Bible, and that was one of the
Mm-hmm.
cuts we did. Was this is the story of David going through all of his incredible trials, uh, almost getting assassinated by the king at the time, all the
Mm-hmm.
battles he went through, all that stuff. So, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But other people, or other authors or hosts, whatever, are um, I don't want to say subservient, maybe beholden to, funding, beliefs, whatever. And, they get their content modified in one way or another, um, various reasons why it happens. But, then the output of their work is drastic. The tone is drastically different. The way it reads is, or sounds, or, whatever watches is drastically different. Um, I think it's just important to understand, if I had to leave anybody with anything, is, where is your content coming from? Who is trying to give you that content? And then, who may have impacted it between when you saw it and what it originally was supposed to be. Um, you could say that about a lot of stuff that has persisted through history. Um, you know, Bible, any sort of great work of, literature. What's the one with Don Quixote? That one's been around for quite a
what are
while.
you talking about? Like jousting of windmills?
Yeah, a little bit. Um, but I think there's
I thought that was
I
the
think
name.
there's a is it?
Yeah, pretty sure
I
that's
don't
jousting at windmills.
yeah, I'm not 100% sure. It's been a long time since I read that in
Yeah, that's the one.
college.
Attacking imaginary enemies. That's the whole phrase. That's why you can still use it like in a phrase. You'll say like,
Oh,
"Oh, he's jousting at windmills."
today I learned
Yeah.
or relearned. I don't know. My brain sometimes picks and chooses what it wants to actually remember. Um, but there's definitely a lot of hands that touch things along the way, whether it is an AI or a tech company or an interpreter or an editor. there's a lot of
Filters.
uh, yeah, exactly. Thank you, Stover. There's a lot of filters that are in play when you are absorbing content. And at the end of the day, if that content is free and you didn't pay for it, you have to ask yourself, why am I not paying for this? Where, and then how am I paying for this? Am I paying for it, socially or medically? I hope not medically, whatever. But it's just, are you the product at the end of the day? Are you what they're trying to get? Do they want your time and your energy and your, emotional and physical energy? I going back to what you were saying about, Facebook being overwhelming, sometimes people find social media to be exhausting. You go on, you're trying to find information about your friends and family, and you get enraged and or mad or sad, and then you come out of it feeling exhausted or sad or depressed, you know, and it's not a good feeling. You shouldn't, that's your free time. Most people aren't on Facebook for work. Unless you're a social media person, you're probably not on Facebook for work. And you don't go on there, most people, I don't think, well, I'm sure there are some people, to, enrage people. There's trolls and yada, 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 and there's people who do that. But, most people go on there to just try and find out more about their friends and family and, you know, keep in touch. And when you go to do those things and it's just disappointing or sad or, enraging.
Yeah, I think the
Like
latest
I said
one's just
before,
annoying because sometimes I'm just
annoying.
trying to get to what I want to get to, and there's all this other stuff in the way. And it's not necessarily ads, but it might just be I'm just trying to search up this one person. Okay, finally got to. All right, whatever. And then you just put the phone down. You're like, well, I don't want to do that again.
Mhm. Mhm. No, I've definitely felt that as well, and like you said earlier as well. I find myself feeling better when I just don't engage in that. The world isn't really burning down. We're all still living our lives, moving day to day. You know, Society is not collapsing in on itself. Um, really, everybody just wants what's best for their family, and sometimes those belief systems might differ, but that's not a reason to go up in arms about. Everyone's allowed to. I believe everyone's allowed to live their own life the way they want to, and until they infect other people, that's fine by me. You know, I think there are certain things that we have to be aware of as the population of. I feel like I have to add this caveat as population sizes explode. There's definitely like the impact on the planet. And I think that's another unfortunate contested thing, or conspiracy or whatever is the more people on the planet, the less resources there are per person. That's a very real finite thing. There's only so much stuff on the earth, and we just we can have more people, but we can't get more stuff.
Yeah,
So
what is it, like
and
10 to the 24th kilograms of material on the Earth?
yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, that's it. That's all we have.
Yeah,
Until
because
we
that's the
become
planet.
a
That's the planet with
yeah,
all its
that's the
minerals and
whole
everything.
freaking planet. So that's all we have. That's all we have to work with. You can have more people, but that's locked in. Unless a meteor hits us, in which case we're probably screwed anyway. That's
Hey, but
probably
just
all we're
keep
in
in
for.
mind, some places are, with their population density is looking very different in the next 30 years. Like I saw this thing from
Yeah.
Denmark about how like they actually are really worried about maintaining a stable population. So it's
Hmm.
almost there's you got some that are just jacking up the population like crazy, and there's nothing that they're doing to stop it. And there's other countries like, well, we want to be conservative and
Japan.
want to take care of it, but then they're gonna just fall off a cliff. So
Yep.
it's unfair to both of them. It's like, hey, we need to balance this out for both of them if we want to have a stable world. So
For sure. I know Japan's also one of those. They have a birth rate issue, and you have to wonder. There's all this information coming out about the just overwhelming amount of information about global warming and yada yada yada. I'm wondering how that feel. Every time I say that, I'm like, um,
Say what you gotta say.
yeah. So you have to wonder if all that information has an impact on people wanting to have kids, and, doing those things and bringing life into the world.
The
And
answer
if
is
your
yes.
perspective of the world is going to burn out, or we're all going to flood and die or whatever, and I'm siding with you on this, Stover. Yeah, the answer I feel is yes. I feel like all that information, all that fear mongering might be an extreme word for it, but I do believe, if we don't curb our use of the planet, regardless if it's emissions or whatever, there's definitely isn't going to be the same planet in 30 years, 20 years as it is today. There's definitely going to be a battle for clean water going the way we're going. It's going to be a very real and scary thing. There's only so much clean water on this planet. If anybody doesn't know that, although there's 80% water, the clean water is very, very, very rare, in comparison to the salt water.
Yeah, and that you don't have to treat or anything. And but the good news is, at least for some places, it'll go up in price. But like places like Israel, when they had a water issue, I mean they said forget this, crank on the desalination plants. I know it's not the best idea, but your water prices go up, but you at least have it, which is, I mean, that's the thing that
Kind of the
we,
more important thing.
yeah,
It's just
more
having it.
just have it. Yeah,
Yes.
like what I expect water prices to go up. Makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. For sure. And you always have to, keeping on the theme of the environment as well. There's all the people with the, like electric cars and whatnot, those things. Uh, and I saw it. It'd been brought up to me before this, but I saw a great, what is it? The Silicon Valley little scene, whatever skit thing, where one of the guys gets the Tesla, and he's like, "Oh, I'm part of the green revolution," and then the other guy, who's more the cynic, he's like, "Do you know where your electricity comes from?" And yeah, and my girlfriend loves to bring that up. She's from Canada. And Alberta still gets, specifically from Alberta. Alberta gets a lot of their energy from coal. So in reality, you buy an electric vehicle there. I mean, at the end of the day, are you really that better? Also, lithium and batteries, that's not great either. Those things aren't good for the environment. Um, and they're hard to reuse at the moment.
No
They
such
need
thing as a free lunch with
more
energy.
more recyclable practices. But yeah, I mean, it's about knowing the supply chain and where you're getting things from. And I think that is becoming more of a prominent topic. And, it's it's something that's definitely going to be on the forefront of all of our lives, especially those who live on the coast in the coming years. We had that freeze in Texas too. I was the polar vortex breaking apart and sending all that cold front down into Texas. Polar vortex normally keeps all the cold air from the North Pole, in this case, up by the North Pole. But what had happened was part of it broke apart, and the cold air that normally sits up there came down in North America and froze the bejesus out of Texas, and parts of the central United States, as
Oh
well as
yeah,
North
everything
America
else
on
in
the
its
other.
path too, dude. It's just
Yeah,
North
yeah, not
Dakota and
just
South
Texas,
Dakota. They're
Texas.
used to it.
Yeah, exactly, and they're all winterized and they know how to handle it and blah blah blah. But Texas definitely, the reason why they're the word I keep saying is because they're not prepared. They were not prepared, and we saw what happened. You know, um, and you have to wonder how, and tie it back to the whole thing, Stover. You have to wonder how much of those beliefs came from all this propagated, excuse my language, but crap on the internet.
Yeah.
That just gets spread. We spent years understanding how these emissions work. How carbon in the atmosphere holds heat. It carbon dioxide. All the greenhouse gases. Well, the reason they're called greenhouse gases is because they hold in heat, and like in the greenhouse that stays warm, keeps the thing warm. So the simplest way I can put it is it just keeps stuff warmer, and we don't want to be that much warmer, the Earth definitely cycles cold, hot, cold, hot. It's a totally natural thing. But, you want it to cycle back to cold too, and then back to hot in a very slow and consistent pattern.
Yeah,
You
you're
don't
getting at
really want to
insulation
know
though.
what's happening.
That's
Yeah,
the way
you,
of
you
it's
really,
insulator.
yeah, you really don't want to know what's happening. But when it happens all of a sudden, like we're watching Breaking Bad, so like a extreme chemical reaction. We just watched that episode where he was describing it. It's very apparent. It causes a lot of destruction and blah blah blah. It's a cycle. Everything cycles. The Earth, the Moon, the universe. We're all moving. We're all rotating around something. Gravity has its effect on everybody, but at the end of the day, we don't want to keep storing that heat. Um, we want to lose it at some point, because if you don't lose heat, like all the way back to what we're talking about servers, stuff's going to start to break down, whether it's technical or biological. Certain things can only survive at certain areas,
Like
and
the
yeah,
oceans.
life like the oceans. Yeah, the majority of the life on the planet lives in the ocean.
Keep in mind
There's
though, global warming. We've had it where we were growing vine, like the types of vine trees you would use for wine and stuff in the Alps, like the lower level of the Alps at one point. So we used to have a warmer place already, ironically enough. And then I was learning about 536 AD. There was a point in time where, like, a volcano erupted, and there was so much insulation in the air from all of the particles and such that blocked out the
mm-hmm,
sun, and then you can't grow crops and stuff. It's kind of like an Interstellar when it's all that
yep,
dust in the air. Yeah,
mm-hmm,
like that's like
yeah,
my real fear is you have enough particles in the air where the sun can't come through, then your crops can't grow, and then people die because there's not enough food around. And yeah, yeah, that's what Interstellar was trying to get at. They kind of got it, but not everyone
got a
necessarily
little
got
weird at
that.
the end.
Yeah, a little weird at the end, but that first part, I'm like, yeah, no, okay, cool. It's an extreme version of what could happen if we never ever clean up the air.
Yeah, absolutely. There was the Dust Bowl in the 1920s or 30s, something like
30s,
that.
yeah.
30s. Yeah, that wasn't too good. Not that that's related to global warming or anything, but definitely the use of the agriculture, I believe, was part of or the agricultural processes were part of creating that. I don't know
That's its
exactly
own
how far
separate
into it.
topic, by the way, for
Yeah, I
global
mean, there's so
warming and
many
such.
different
Yeah,
branches we could go down this evening. Um, but yeah, it's you gotta care about the people around you. You gotta care about your planet. You only get we have the one. We have Mars too. We can maybe go there someday if our technology is good enough to build an atmosphere and use the planet. Um, don't see that happening in the near future. Um,
yeah. We just need cold
Elon,
plants there. Then we'll just make it so hot that like it actually can build its own atmosphere. Oh wait, hey, I mean, if you got to build an atmosphere, if we already figured
I
out
mean, yeah,
here.
whatever works. But there's definitely some things that could go wrong. I think the internet definitely likes to dramatize a lot of it. Um, and I think I believe that in the next 50 years, if we don't do anything, we're probably screwed. Um, like pretty solidly screwed. At least most people on the coast are. Like you're not gonna have gonna be underwater. Ice caps are gonna melt. Whatever. If they might freeze again. Sure, totally, absolutely possible. Could go back to being cold. But in the immediate future, it's gonna strike the people. Um, so we could lose enough people through those processes of the earth warming up that then we stop outputting enough in the earth to cool back down again. That's totally something I believe could happen. um, but ideally we'd like to try and avoid billions of human lives lost. I think that's ideal. I feel like I don't want to see billions of people die. People joke and they're like, oh, we need a new plague, but you know do we though? Like, how about we try and find ways to become better humans, take care of each other, find better processes,
Stewardship.
live our lives better. And then, yeah, stewardship, exactly. And then, at the end of the day, we go to Mars, we terraform Mars, we start living on Mars, we start finding ways to live in space. We take the Star Trek perspective because they have that nice, pretty outcome where everybody on the planet starts working together and they start going out. And, as an optimistic person, I like that perspective. But I feel like there's a lot of stuff working against us right now. Not that it is, not that it has to be our future, but it does seem like if we don't make changes towards that, start making, because nothing happens overnight. But if you don't start making incremental changes towards helping our fellow man and, trying not to making smarter decisions, building on the scientific methodly following brilliant engineers, scientists over the, several thousand years we've been on this planet. I don't think we're in for a good ride unless we start falling back on. They say don't repeat history, but history definitely has some things it can teach us.
Yeah,
And
basically
we're getting at follow.
We're getting at cohesion, stewardship.
Yeah.
Caring for who's around in your corner locally. Those are like and then not using the internet for like malicious means. It's like that's probably the 4 themes that you probably can get away from this like hour and a half podcast.
I hope so. I hope so. And if not get anything out, just think more critically about what you're looking at, where you're looking at it, why you're looking at it. I'm not saying stop doing everything today, but just think about it a little more in detail.
Well, you're talking about steering the ship. Why do you do what you do? It's an auditing process.
Why do you do? Exactly. Yeah, audit yourself. Be introspective for a little while. Just think about it. We all have our habits. We all do stuff that we don't like or whatever. But, just taking a measure of your own life every so often, I feel like is a good thing. I try and do it. Something I employ constantly. Sometimes I'm like, why the heck am I here? How did I get to this point in my life? Why am I doing these things? And I realize they're not what I want to be doing. Sometimes I keep down that path. I like to play video games. I don't think they're the best use of my time, but God, they make life a little better. I really do believe that. They take some of the stresses that we deal with every day and they make you forget about them for a moment. And at the end of the day, I think I just want to be a happy person, less stressed. And, I think with less stress, you have more empathy. You're stressed and always worried about your survival. It's hard to worry about other people's survivals. Care about yourself first and then help others. I found that to be true in my own life. It's very hard to help people when I have no control over my own life and I just feel completely lost. So, and then now, thankfully, I do feel in a much better place where I can now take care of other people because I feel like I have a very strong grasp on my own life at this point. I'm very thankful that I do. Because I didn't like where I was before this. And at the end of the day, it's easier for me to care for others and think about these things and, want to help people. And, I shared this with you, Stover. I want to sometimes feel like I need to be doing something more impactful with my time on this planet. I don't know what that is. I still don't. I've been thinking about this for a while. But, I definitely feel like I could help people in one way or another to help make society a little better. I might never get there, but, it's about just the drive at the end of the day, just the want to help people. Because at the end of the day, your energy, however you want to interpret the word energy, definitely impacts the people around you. And that helps make their lives better. If you want to make your life better, people will see that in you and they'll want to make your life better or make their own life better, and they'll learn from your examples and, propagation of ideas out in your own communities, yada, yada, yada. It's been my phrase in the night. So
if you want to for next time, we do a fair amount of mentorship podcasts for that reason.
Mentorship podcasts.
Yeah, well, we've done I've done a lot of mentorship podcasts, mainly because we had the Chemical Engineering Society had a mentorship program, and then I got him on the podcast a couple times here or there. Then Julie and I have done it before. We were going to redo one at some point also, because the first one we did was the audio was pretty whack, but we're thinking about doing that one again at some point. Mentorship is probably the most popular subject on this podcast, actually.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a very valuable thing to be doing, like helping other people. It's kind of how we got to where we were. The bigger our communities came, the easier it was to develop ideas and thoughts. And, we're hunter-gatherer tribes out, wherever. As soon as we started forming communities and cities and, building great empires, we saw society really advance. It's easier to come up with cool things when you're not trying to figure out where your next meal's coming from.
Ain't that the
Seems to be
truth?
a general rule. Yeah, having been there at one point in my life, it's nice not to have to worry about food or water or shelter or internet. Internet's a human right. Just putting that out there puts a lot of people on the same page. Although, as much as we have trash talked, puts out hesitancy over the internet, I still think it's amazing the amount of information that's out there, the freedom it gives people. YouTube is its own whole, but it does have a lot of phenomenal information out there.
I use it all the time. I'm a pro YouTube dude.
Home repair. I mean, I've looked up so many YouTube videos on how to do things. Just home repair tutorials, software development. The possibilities are limitless, but it's about responsible use of those tools and all the points that we've made tonight, this evening. That really, just get people thinking more about this very confusing and very weird thing that is computers and technology, and it at times is arbitrary and funky to understand. I definitely think that the sciences are a little easier to understand. I think chemistry is right up there with the internet too, about how funky it is. And you're just like, why are you doing this? What is going on? What angle did you bind at? I don't understand. So as you can tell, I'm totally a chemistry guy. But yeah, I don't know what else to say. I feel at this point I'm kind of rambling.
Yeah, but I think we can call it, man. You don't have to ramble. No reason to ramble.
Cool. Well, it's been fun. I've had a really good time. So it was better than I imagined it would.
Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. For everyone else out there listening, have a good night.